Hey, everybody out here. We are here tonight with a very special guest. His name is Gavin Fish, and he has done extensive investigation into the case of Ellen Greenberg and has a huge following on the internet. And he's gotten into so much detail of what was investigated or not investigated in that case. So, Gavin, you've investigated so many cases. What in particular stands out that is so extreme with Ellen Greenberg, the loose ends, things that are not connected, items and situations that were not properly investigated, on and on. So, in your mind, what stands out the most?
Well, I was alerted to the case by a viewer who said, "Hey, Gavin, check this one out. This is a woman who was stabbed 20 times. Half of them were in the back of her head and neck, and the medical examiner ruled it a suicide. It's right up your alley." And so, the kind of cases that speak to me, the ones that I really like to dig into, are the ones where not only has some kind of tragedy occurred, but then some kind of abuse, either by people within the system or the system itself, has like stalled justice, or in some cases even investigation at all. And Ellen Greenberg's case is exactly that kind of case. It just doesn't ring true that somebody would commit suicide by first stabbing themselves in the back of the head and then stabbing themselves in the heart. And then when you look at it, you start to ask questions like, well, could she have even done that? Is that humanly possible? And then to go through the docs and see the city of Philadelphia fighting so hard and for so long to say that, no, we got this right. This is a suicide, nothing to see here. That just didn't sit right with me. So I started to dig in.
And Josh Shapiro, who's the current attorney general running for governor, and part of his platform is what an anti-crime fighter he is. Twice, when the Greenberg family appealed to him to reopen the investigation, change the medical examiner's report from suicide to either a homicide or at least undetermined, twice he said suicide. And contrary to everything that seems to me obvious, that at least needs further investigation. Now, what do you think? The big question is why? Why such resistance to properly investigating this case?
That is always the first question I ask when I look at cases like this. I like to say I'm an amateur student of economics, and so I really love to understand incentives, incentives and disincentives, right? In this case, the power, because the state of Philadelphia is set up so that the only person that has the power to change an opinion like that, a manner of death, is the medical examiner that performed the autopsy. So in this case, it's a man named Marlon Osborne. He could say, this is not a suicide, I've changed my mind. And he could do that at any time without any fanfare, without any legal representation, without anything. He could do that. So why wouldn't he do that? It feels like there's some sort of pressure being brought to bear on him.
In fact, adding to that mystery, Gavin, is the fact that Marlon Osborne, the medical examiner, originally concluded that it was a homicide, and then a short time later changed it to suicide. So that sticks out as a big question, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And Dr. Osborne, who I've never met or talked to, he really isn't all that interested in talking to me, I think. He's been caught in a couple of different lies about this case by the Greenberg family lawyer, a man named Joe Pedraza. One of the lies that he was caught in was that he had no, employment. He hadn't received any, what is the word that I'm looking for? He hadn't gotten in trouble in his employment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there were like 40 cases where he had been written up for those cases. So that's one of the lies he was caught in. And then another lie that I think it definitely qualifies as a lie. I think it's a lie. Is he said that during the course of his investigation, he uh, sidelined a neuropathologist, a Dr. Rourke, and she said, she told him one thing or another. And then when Dr. Rourke was asked about that, she's like, well, I always bill for those things. I have no memory of it. I have no paperwork of it. I've never once not done paperwork. So it feels to me like Dr. Osborne is covering something up just by blatantly lying in his deposition.
According to Tom Brennan, the investigator for the family, he says that when he looked into this and he questioned Osborne about why he changed it from uh, homicide originally, that was his original finding, from homicide to suicide. Um, he said, and this was after a meeting, I think, with the police and other officials, he said he was persuaded by them.
Yeah, so I have questions about that meeting. So his testimony is that he was called into a meeting with his boss, Dr. Gulino, with a couple of representatives from the DA's office and from the police, the Philly Police Department. And they told him that, well, she was alone. There was no way that anybody else was in the apartment. Therefore, she had to have done it herself. So he was persuaded. And he also testified that after the meeting, Dr. Gulino kind of pressured him kind of like this, like, well, it sure would be bad to see the wrong person imprisoned, convicted on your work. So make sure that you do this right. He got those kinds of, that kind of pressure from his boss. That's his testimony anyway. But knowing that he's lied about a couple of other things, I don't just out of, I guess, goodwill believe him.
Well, he also missed marks of strangulation on the body of Ellen Greenberg, according to other experts. And apparently, before that, in another case, he also missed marks of strangulation in another case, in another body.
Yeah, and I've talked to medical examiners about that. There are telltale signs of strangulation, but if they're not there, that doesn't mean strangulation didn't happen, right? So, for example, petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes. So the blood vessels in the eyes burst, and you've got redness in the whites of your eyes. That's something that always seems to indicate strangulation. The other one is a broken hyoid bone, seems to indicate that. But in the absence of those things, if those things aren't there, that doesn't mean strangulation didn't exist. The Greenbergs have been kind enough to share with me the actual autopsy photos, the actual crime scene photos, not just the 3D renderings that they had done. And there are definite marks on Ellen's throat. And then what a medical examiner does, and this gets a little graphic, but as they make their incision, they kind of fold up the tissue, they deflect up the muscles, the connecting tissues in the neck, and right in the middle, right there, is a giant hemorrhage about the size of a thumbprint. So to me, again, I'm a layperson, but I consult with people who are trained on this. They say that is an indication of manual strangulation.
At the very least, it would be suggestive of manual strangulation. He made no remarks about it at all, did he?
No, none at all.
Yeah. See, another interesting thing, I think, is he got out of town, I guess, shortly after certain questions were being asked. And he landed on his feet in Florida. And I think first Broward County and out West Palm Beach medical examiner. That's a pretty nice job down there. Nice atmosphere.
Yeah, if you like the heat. If you want to get out of Philadelphia weather, I'm sure it's nice. What I've learned about the medical examiner system is there are only about 400 medical examiners in the entire United States. It's a small community. And they do tend to move around here and there. In fact, I think Dr. Gulino is the only member of the medical examiner staff. Actually, I think he may have moved already too. I'm trying to remember. like it's not uncommon for people to move around, for medical examiners to move around.
Yeah.
But what kind of disturbs me about that tiny, tiny community, I don't know how much you've read as far as the court records in this case, but there's the most recent activity in the lawsuit is the city of Philadelphia was allowed to appeal one of the rulings by Judge Glennis Hill. Went to the appellate court, and the city filed their brief, and then there was an amicus brief signed by the National Association. I can't remember exactly what it is, but the National Association of Medical Examiners. I think that's what it is. I think it's called NAME, National Association of Medical Examiners. And they wrote an amicus brief that was basically, their argument was, hey, we're trained people, stop questioning our opinions. If you question this opinion, then all of our opinions are going to be under scrutiny, and therefore the court should not allow the Greenbergs to question this opinion. And it's just, I don't know, because it's such a small community, they really kind of circle the wagons.
I mean, that is such a ridiculous logic there, that they're not to be questioned, so whatever they say is the proper ruling, that's it, no questions asked, or else you're impinging upon their credibility. I mean,
yeah, and what do the Greenbergs want? The Greenbergs in this, they want the obvious murder of their daughter to be investigated. And in order to get there has to be a crime. And as long as the medical examiner's office says this was not a crime, it's not a crime in the state of Pennsylvania to take your own life. It's just, that's not a crime. And the medical examiner's office and the city of Philadelphia's position is, hey, this is just a non-binding opinion over here by the medical examiner. The Philly PD could investigate if they want. That's their position. And while it's, I guess, technically true that the Philly PD could investigate the case, they don't, because they know the district attorney won't prosecute it because there isn't a crime.
So, Gavin, you have concluded that it was the murder.
To me, it's a murder for sure.
And,
for sure.
And who is a suspect, or should be the suspect, or at least a person of interest?
Yeah, so if I were investigating this case, the very first person I would take a look at is her fiance, Sam Goldberg. So Ellen was living with her fiance. They had been engaged since, I think they were, it was under a year or about a year, something like that. And when she died in January, they were scheduled to be married the following August, right? 8 months later, 7 months later, of Philadelphia, in a nice apartment complex. And his story is that he went down to the gym to work out, and when he came back, the door was locked, I have this on my desk now because I test them all the time, by one of these swing bar locks, like in a hotel room. And that for half an hour, 45 minutes, he tried to get in. Sorry about that. He tried to get in, and she wasn't answering, and so he broke down the door and he found her dead in their apartment. The problem with that story for me is that the latch, the swing bar lock, would have been far more broken in order for him to get in. And I've tested this. If you go to my YouTube channel, you can see that I've tested this. I just don't, I think that if police took him at his word that that's what happened, then they're really, really bad investigators, because it just wouldn't look like that. The crime scene wouldn't look like that.
Well, there were so many loose ends, things that should have been investigated. As a matter of form and usual proper procedure, it was ignored. And, the question is, was it merely incompetence, or was this by design?
So that's a good question. I think...
Or was it a comedy of errors?
I think it started out as incompetence. This happened in a place where this kind of crime doesn't happen. It had been a long time prior to Ellen's death that there had been a homicide there in Manioc, and they weren't really equipped to investigate those things. It was in the middle of a blizzard that had closed the entire city, and that's the excuse they make anyway. When you look at the security videos, they got there pretty quick, but I think it started out as incompetence. They found her lying there dead on the floor, a young man visibly shaken up, apparently saying, that he had been locked out, and so they believed him and they called it good. And then they made the mistake of letting the apartment complex have the apartment professionally cleaned by a crime scene cleanup company that the Philadelphia PD provided their number.
Yeah.
And that happened before they ever got. Okay, so Ellen's body was removed the night of the 26th, and on the 27th, Dr. Osborne goes, "This is a homicide," and the Philadelphia police go, "Oh, holy cow! Well, let's get a warrant. Let's go back in there and investigate further." But between the time she was taken out and the time that they got the warrant and went in, somebody at the Philly PD had told the apartment complex, "You could have it professionally cleaned. Here's who we use." So there was no forensic investigation after that initial investigation. So I think at that point, they started to cover their own rear ends. That's what I think.
As a matter of clarification for the general public out there, this crime scene cleanup crew, it was a civilian organization. They didn't document what they were doing. There wasn't any record. So therefore, they were really destroying or at least messing up possible evidence. But again, Gavin, now.
But there's a part of that, so the crime scene cleanup company is a professional company. They do this, right? So they wouldn't do it without the Philadelphia PD releasing the scene, first of all. And then second of all, the apartment manager, a woman named Melissa Ware, was kind of concerned about, hey, this is moving kind of quickly. And she was concerned about things going missing in the apartment or whatever. So she went in, her testimony is she went in and videoed the state of the apartment. And then when the police found out that it had been cleaned before they did their, warrant authorized search, she said, well, here's a video. And to this day, the Greenbergs have been trying to get that video. And the city of Philadelphia says the video doesn't exist. But Melissa Ware says, I gave it to him.
Another interesting peculiarity here. But, but before that, the fact that the police department gave them permission to bring in a civilian crew because they were working it initially as a suicide, but as a matter of proper procedure, they shouldn't have been determining that as a suicide until the medical examiner's pronouncement, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, there is I can't remember the title of the book, but it's considered the Bible of death investigations. Mm-hmm. And friends of mine, including Tom Brennan, this is part of their training over the years, right? This is the Bible. And that one, the first page, the title page says, treat every death investigation as a homicide until proven otherwise. Right. They're always to treat it like a homicide. And I think they went in there and they saw Ellen lying dead on the floor with a knife wound in her chest without very much blood. Like it wasn't like a Hollywood scene where it's Dexter or something, right? It wasn't that way. There was blood, but at first glance, I think for untrained people who didn't deal with homicides very often, to go in and see, well, there's a knife in her chest and there's not very much blood. She probably knocked her head on the way down, which is why there's that smear there. Let's call it a suicide. I can see why it happened, but it still should not have happened.
Yeah, and also, the way I understand it, Sam Goldberg, the fiance, was taken to police headquarters that night in handcuffs, but then there's no record of whether he was questioned or if he was, what questions were asked of him. And his lawyer uncle quickly arrived on the scene, a prominent attorney who's now the head of the Judicial Review Board, which is, ethics and behavioral lawyers. he arrives on the scene, and Sam Goldberg, the fiance, walks out quickly, doesn't he? And that's it.
So there is, I guess, competing witness testimony on that. Um, I published a video where I went over that, and there are witnesses that say that Mr. Goldberg was removed in handcuffs and he was taken to district headquarters where he was questioned. And there are people that have said behind the scenes that he was questioned in the presence of a lawyer. When I published that, Mr. Goldberg's family took umbrage to that, and they wrote me a very detailed letter about what their side of the story is. Their side of the story, if I'm remembering this correctly, and I could pull it up, but basically they say, hey, the Schwartzmans did arrive after the police.
That's the lawyer uncle, Schwartz.
That's the lawyer uncle, yep. They did arrive after the police. They identified themselves as lawyers, as Sam Goldberg's family, and when the police asked them if they wanted the police to stop questioning Sam, they say no, they permitted it to continue to happen. And their story is he was questioned without a lawyer for 3 hours in the apartment, and when he was taken to district headquarters, it was not in handcuffs. So they're telling different stories. What I believe happened is what Tom Brennan's investigation has found, is that he was taken to district headquarters. He was handcuffed when he did. He was questioned in the presence of an attorney, because this is a family of prominent people, wealthy people, lawyers. They're not going to let, I just can't imagine any scenario under which they would let one of their nephew, their cousin, their son, to be questioned about the death of their would have been daughter-in-law, niece-in-law, and so forth, without an attorney present. I don't find their story to me compelling.
Wait a minute, let me get this straight. I may be confused here. Their version is that Sam was questioned in the apartment for 3 hours before he was brought to the police station.
That's what they said happened. Yeah.
And then at the police station, the police asked if they could continue to.
No, that all happened at the apartment complex. Their story is that Mr. James Schwartzman, who's the judge uncle, and Mr. Camion Schwartzman, who is the lawyer cousin, arrived after the police. And when they arrived, they said, hey, I'm Sam's uncle. He's Sam's cousin. We're both lawyers. And the police said, oh, well, Judge Schwartzman, should we stop questioning Sam? We're talking to him upstairs. And Schwartzman said, no, go ahead and keep talking to him. That's their story.
Yeah, I mean, a lawyer wouldn't tell his client, not to talk without the presence of the lawyer. By the way, I called Mr. Schwartzman for comments, and there hasn't been any return call.
I would imagine there won't be. The Schwartzmans and Goldbergs have been silent pretty much since the funeral, as far as I can tell. And in their letter to me, their lawyer stated, he described it as they've maintained a respectful silence this whole time. That's how he characterized it in his letter to me. I don't find it respectful at all.
I also left a message for Sam Goldberg, the fiance, and there was no return on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you and I have done due diligence to give the other side an opportunity.
Yeah.
Other side of the story, but there's been no response. At least to me, there hasn't, and I guess to you also.
I've had one response, which was a letter from their lawyer.
Yeah. Now, so in that letter, do they deny that he was taken to the police station in handcuffs?
They deny that.
No. So that's their version, but there's witnesses that say the opposite.
There's at least one witness that I know of that says the opposite.
Yeah. Now, also, it's you guys, I think you and Tom Brennan or other people might have uncovered the fact and publicized the fact that there were conflicts of interest involving Shapiro as the Attorney General investigating this case, correct?
Yeah, and that is the reason why I got that lawyer letter in the first place. So what happened was I received an anonymous tip through my website. If you go to my website, you can send a message to me without your name, email, phone number, or IP address. I can't track it. And in that tip, it said that, you know, Shapiro, Josh Shapiro, who's the Attorney General of the state of Pennsylvania, knows the Schwartzman family. He went to school with Judge Schwartzman's daughter, Kimberly, also known as Kim, also known as Kimby, and so they know each other. And then it said something like they probably have other connections through the mainline Jewish community, is how it was described. And so the first thing I did is I have friends in that community, and so I reached out to them for their comment on that, to see what they thought about it. And I was given some pointers, some directions to go. And within, less than a day, I was able to find photographs of Attorney General Shapiro with Kimberly Schwartzman Kimmel. And man, I have it right here. I even went through the process of buying his high school graduating yearbook, and taking a look in there, and I think I'll find it pretty quickly. ST, let's see. So yeah, he'll be right in here. Here he is. So I was able to find that they went to the same high school, and they knew each other, and so and I was able to find what I thought were pretty credible, reliable sources showing that at least Kimberly Schwartzman and her husband Wayne had given campaign donations to Mr. Shapiro. I found Twitter posts of Mr. Shapiro congratulating his friends Wayne and Kimby, using the word friend, things like that. So I posted a video saying I think that Mr. Shapiro is in violation of the state ethics conduct, right? Ethics rules, statutes, and I laid it out. And then I think I posted that on a Tuesday, and on Friday they very late in the day, very quietly let a reporter know that they were handing the case, they were referring out of their office.
Yeah. Now, shouldn't Shapiro have been aware that was at least the appearance of a conflict of interest? Did he have no memory of those past contacts? He never.
Yeah.
He didn't recuse himself voluntarily, or even mention it as an issue. Correct?
And I've reached out to his press office. I've tried to talk to somebody in his office. Nobody wants to talk to me. He did not admit to a conflict of interest. He said that because of the appearance of a conflict of interest,
right,
they were referring the case out. And in my video, I tried to be really fair about that. I didn't know that there's a conflict of interest. It just, to me, looked like it. Yeah. And I used words like maybe and could be and things like that. And so, yeah, they referred the case out. Now, kind of the weird provenance of this case is that the case was originally within the district attorney's office, the Philadelphia district attorney's office. But a man named Larry Krasner was elected DA, and he had been the Greenberg's attorney prior to being elected DA. So he had to, by Pennsylvania state law, refer the case to the Attorney General's office. There it sat for 4 years, and they said twice that they did a thorough investigation. I'm not convinced that there was a thorough investigation done there, but that is what they said happened. But it languished there for 4 years, 4.5 years almost. And it wasn't until my video that they decided to refer it out.
And during those 4 years, Gavin, the family twice approached the AG's office, Josh Shapiro, to reopen the case, take another look at it, and twice he rejected that and said suicide, correct?
Yeah, and there were weird things about that too. Like when the when the case was at the district attorney's office, I don't know if Tom told you this, but a guy named Guy DeAndrea, who was a prosecutor in the district attorney's office, wanted to take a look at the case, and he literally found the file, the box, underneath Christmas decorations in a closet. Like that is literally how he described finding the case. That nobody in the district attorney's office was taking it seriously. And so Guy DeAndrea kind of gets involved. He ends up leaving, and a couple of other people start looking at the case. And then when it got referred to the Attorney General's office, those same district attorney investigators got promoted up into the AG's office, and they're the ones that started doing a close look into the case at the AG's office. So I just don't feel like there's been good faith by the Attorney General to do a thorough investigation into the case. And the letters that they've sent to the Greenbergs are so demeaning, and are just so they're just so demeaning. It just baffles me that an attorney actually wrote those letters. It's crazy.
This was coming out of the AG's office.
Mm-hmm.
Well, another peculiarity is the tissue sample by Lindsay Emery, a neuropathologist, who concluded upon examining, this is from the back of the neck, she said it was inflicted post-mortem, which meant after Ellen was dead. Mm-hmm. Now, that was an interesting progression of the situation there, how that was handled. So she made that conclusion. And then when Tom Brennan and the family and Joe Pedraza, the attorney for the family, brought this to Shapiro's office, he merely stated that Lindsay Emery misspoke, with no explanation of how she misspoke, correct?
That's my reading of the letter. Dr. Emery was pretty unequivocal in her testimony in the deposition when Mr. Pedraza would ask her, he asked, the question was framed in terms of how much pain would Ellen have experienced when the knife went into that particular stab wound. That was the framing of the question. And Lindsay Emery's response, Dr. Emery said, well, my problem here is that there's no indication of a vital response. So I can't tell you she felt any pain. And he went, well, are you saying that Ellen was dead? And she just said, yes. She was pretty unequivocal in her testimony. She did not misspeak. She said there was no vital response. That means no heart pumping blood, no blood pressure. That means that Ellen was dead.
Well, in addition to that, you're saying the same thing, but more specifically, there was no hemorrhage, meaning no bleeding, which meant the heart had stopped pumping, which meant she was dead when it was inflicted.
That's right. All
right. Now, another interesting twist there is that after the family contested that, Shapiro's ruling that, she misspoke, that Lindsay Emery misspoke, didn't Marlon Osborne, the medical examiner, who originally was in on this case, first pronouncing it a homicide and changing it to a suicide, didn't he say that he carried that same sample over to another pathologist and she came up with a different conclusion?
That's what he says. He said that he did that. This would have been years before Dr. Emery saw it. It was Dr. Rourke Adams. And his testimony was he took that tissue sample to Dr. Rourke Adams, who did not work at the medical examiner's office, but consulted with the medical examiner's office because she was a neuropathologist. She was certified to look at the head and brain, right? And so they would use Dr. Rourke Adams for her opinion. And he described it as, I think the word was curbside. He curbsided her to get her opinion. Now, and he says her opinion was something different than Dr. Emery's opinion later on. But when Stephanie Farr from the Philadelphia Inquirer reached out to Dr. Rourke Adams had no memory of it. and she had no invoice or any other type of paperwork, any documentation about it. And then when Stephanie Farr pressed her, like, do you ever do that without invoicing? Her answer is no, I don't ever do that. So I think that whole testimony of Dr. Osborne that even happened is suspect. And also keep in mind that when years later, when Dr. Gulino, who was the chief medical examiner, took that same tissue sample to Dr. Emery, he specifically asked her not to document looking at that piece of tissue sample. He specifically instructed her, don't write anything down.
Not to file a report.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, what she did end up doing is took hand notes while she was looking at the tissue sample, and those were able to be found by Mr. Pedraza, which then made it possible for him to depose her.
Now, what legitimate reason would there be for ordering her not to file a report?
Well, see, I can't think of one. I can't think of a legitimate reason to do that. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt, right? I mean, we think of medical examiners' offices kind of like CSI, like these beautifully lit blue, sets, and all these people taking so much time on every single case, everything they possibly can, and being thorough and conscientious about everything. But that's not the case. That's not the way a medical examiner's office works. These are places of business where people work, right? And they're so understaffed and so overworked that they make mistakes a lot. I don't know what the exact number is, but I think Dr. Osborne probably did 350 cases in the year that Ellen died. So you're having to do an autopsy and an autopsy report every single day. Some days you're having to do like 6 or 7 autopsies, and then the next couple of days you're writing reports. So it's not like the movies. These people make mistakes all the time, but the one thing that they tend to always do is document everything that they do. That's something that they always do. Dr. Gulino asking her not to document it, that is a red flag.
Well, something else that's very peculiar here is that the district attorney's office turned over Ellen Greenberg's laptop to the FBI for an examination because they were wondering if there were any searches on how to commit suicide, what drugs could kill you, et cetera, et cetera. And the first FBI examination report that came back was there were no such searches, correct?
That's correct.
Now,
sort of. I mean, the district attorney's office didn't have Ellen's laptop. So they had a clone of the drive. This is actually really important because, and I know that Tom went over this with you, but this is so important. In Ellen's faith tradition, the funeral happens quickly.
yeah.
So the following day, and like if we can just establish timeline here, Ellen was discovered dead, let's say, right? At about 6:45-ish, right around in there, right? I don't have the timeline right in front of me, but sometime in the 6 o'clock hour, she was discovered by Sam dead. By 11 o'clock, the entire place was vacated. All the police, all the investigators, the medical examiner's office, they were gone by about 11 o'clock. The next day, family for Mr. Goldberg asked the apartment permission to enter the apartment to get a suit for the funeral because it was going to happen fast.
That was the lawyer uncle, Mr. Schwartzman.
Yes. So Melissa Ware, who was the apartment manager, her testimony is she believes it was Mr. Schwartzman who went in to the apartment to get a suit for Ellen. While he was in there, he removed phones and laptops and took those with him. And then the police got those from him sometime later, a couple days later. So that the chain of custody of those laptops is broken. There's no admissible evidentiary value anywhere in those pieces of electronics.
And as a lawyer, a seasoned lawyer then, and now the judge of what's essentially an ethics board, would know that that's contrary to proper procedure and ethics, correct?
I would imagine so. I would imagine so.
Yeah.
I can't imagine a scenario under which he would have said to himself, "This is a good idea for, for happy reasons." I just don't. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, so then the way I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong with any of this information, but the way I understand it is after the Greenberg family and Tom Brennan, the investigator, kept pressing them, for clarification and more information, they claimed that they sent it to the FBI for a second forensic examination, her laptop. And that examination revealed that she did indeed search for a number of specific ways to commit suicide and the type of drugs to take, et cetera, correct?
That is their story. Yeah.
Okay, so the AG's office is claiming there was a second examination forensically of her laptop by the FBI, correct?
Of the clone of her hard drive.
It's supposed to be identical. Okay, but the peculiarity in this is that apparently the FBI has no record of any second forensic search being done of her laptop, correct?
That is my understanding. Yeah. Yeah. And the kinds of things, so the Greenbergs have her laptop and her phone. And so it is in the same condition it was in 2011 when Ellen died. So those electronics could be searched again. But
is there any way, Gavin, of knowing whether it's been scrubbed beforehand?
No, that's the problem. Or, like, for example, I'm a computer scientist. That's my education and experience. I have never done this, so I don't know what the procedure would be, but I think I could figure out in about 5 minutes how to make a laptop appear to look like it has had suicidal searches on it. I think I could figure that out quickly. I think what I would do is I would open the laptop, I would change the system time to a time when Ellen was alive, and I would make some searches on the medications she took. I would click around on stuff, and then I would close all my browsers. I would change the system time again. I would shut down the laptop. That's how I would do it. So,
Gavin, would it take a computer expert such as yourself with that level of knowledge in order to do that?
No. Anybody could do that.
Really?
So it's, and I'm not saying they did. I'm just saying that because they broke that chain of evidence, there's no way of knowing what was taken off of it, what was put onto it, or anything like that. And in addition, the stuff that the AG's office said was found that had to do with suicide, those are what are called shadow searches. So let me give you an example. There are lots of websites out there that are designed to be clickbaity, right? One of the sites that is notorious for this is the New York Post's website, nypost.com. When you go to the New York Post website, if you look at an article, say for Ambien, there will be advertisements for other things all over the place on that page, but they won't be. I'm going to call them static. That's not a perfect word for it, but they're not static built into the page. They're dynamically reloaded into the page in what's called an iframe, which is essentially a mini browser within the browser. So if Ellen Greenberg had been on a page, say on NewYorkPost.com, that was about Zoloft or Ambien or something like that, and ads were dynamically going through them, those ads could show a search for thoughts of suicide or side effects or stuff like that. And it would show up in her browser's cache as those kinds of searches because they're dynamically loaded
Yeah.
along what's called the query string. So when I looked at that spreadsheet of the stuff that they found, I was like, those are those are obviously related to these pages that she visited. It's just obvious. It's
Yeah.
not.
So that could have been anybody searching for Ambien, and those would be on the computer somewhere because it's all put
Yeah.
in.
Or maybe she didn't even search for Ambien. Maybe she landed on an article that had Ambien in it,
Yeah.
which caused the iframes to dynamically load ads that had to do with the word Ambien in there. You know, it's like there's no. I don't. Okay. I don't believe that Ellen Greenberg would choose to, if she were suicidal, which her doctor said she was not, but if she were suicidal, would she choose to stab herself 20 times to end her life? And would she do it to the back of her head and the back of her neck? Dr. Osborne's defense of his decision or his opinion is that it was possible. But you have to ask yourself what is probable, right? Ellen had sleeping pills. She could have painlessly lie down on the bed, taken a bunch of pills, gone to sleep, and that would have been the end of it. That she had, I mean, I'm not an expert in trying to ideate ways to take your life, but she had different ways to do it that wasn't doing this to yourself and then doing this to yourself.
And what is the actual percentage of women who choose to commit suicide by stabbing themselves? I assume
it's gotta be low.
it's quite low. Yeah.
Gotta be. Yeah.
Especially right through the heart, and the back of the neck. I mean, it just doesn't seem probable, as you say, at the very least. And again, also it's making this difficult to unravel all these discrepancies and to try to find answers to all these unanswered questions is that the DA's office isn't cooperating in releasing a lot of these records. You can't really trace back the sequence of events and what was actually said, what was actually found, what was investigated, what wasn't investigated, because they're really holding tight any documentation and records that they have for the case, correct?
Yeah, and this gets into a part where I have a real beef with the state of Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania has its state version of the Freedom of Information Act, which is a federal act, but in the state of Pennsylvania, we have what's called the Right to Know law. You've been an investigative journalist in the state of Pennsylvania for a long time. I'm sure that you will agree with me that the Right to Know law is a terrible law.
Right.
In most states in the United States, when an investigation into a crime is closed, that is the moment at which a file, the investigative docs, become public. Most states protect them while there's an investigation going, a criminal investigation going, but they let them out once the criminal investigation is not ongoing. In the state of Pennsylvania, criminal investigation files are forever exempt from public disclosure. So the DA's office, under law, does not have to release anything forever, even considering that in the state of Pennsylvania, suicide is not a crime. So all of their investigation into the death of Ellen Greenberg is not a criminal investigation, but they're claiming it is, and so they will not release those documents.
Is there anything by law that would prohibit them from voluntarily releasing those documents?
No, they may release them at their pleasure. They, whatever they want to do, they can do. But they have that, I guess they have that shield if they want to use it.
Yeah.
Right to know law is terrible in the state of Pennsylvania.
And getting back to the fiance, he was never charged in any way, was he?
Sam Goldberg was never charged.
Yeah.
No.
So now the case has moved to a contiguous county, which is Chester County. The DA there has it in her hands now.
That was a weird process because in the history of the Commonwealth, nobody can find an instance where the Attorney General had to, or maybe didn't have to, but did refer a case back down to the district court. They had to figure out what the process was. And so what they had to do was refer it back down to Mr. Krasner in Philadelphia, and then he had to choose somebody else that he would refer to. And he chose District Attorney Ryan in a nearby county, Chester County.
Now, not to link things together here that may not actually be valid, but in this case, Shapiro's a Democrat, Krasner's a Democrat, and the new and the DA of Chester County, in whose hands it is now, is also a Democrat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even if there were different parties, just by the fact that he's the Attorney General of the entire state, and they have contact with each other. I have pictures of Shapiro with her,
Mm-hmm.
so different announcements. So, I mean, can we be certain that Shapiro will not continue to influence the case, even though technically it's out of his hands in another county?
No, we can't be certain of that. I had hoped. So for me, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So were Shapiro a Republican and Krasner a Republican and Ryan a Republican, I would hope that it would go to a Democrat. In this case, it's the opposite. They're all Democrats. I was hoping that it might go to Bucks County, where a Republican is the district attorney. Even then, had it gone to a county that had, the district attorney was of a different party affiliation, they still are law enforcement officers within the same system. So I do believe that Mr. Shapiro has some sort of influence over the district attorney's office, though they will all say that they're independent, that they are elected officials, and they are ultimately responsible to the citizens who elected them. I think that there probably is some connection. So I was actually hoping that it would come out here to Western Pennsylvania, to Crawford County or Clarion County or Erie County or something like that, far, far away from Philadelphia or Harrisburg. But yeah, it landed with District Attorney Ryan. I do have to say, though, from the people that I've talked to, DA Ryan seems to be a straight shooter and somebody who is whose interest is justice. That's what I understand from people who know her and people who've worked with people within that department. The other thing I understand, though, is that that particular district attorney's office is understaffed for different reasons. There's been high attrition, and so I'm wondering how much time and effort they're going to be able to give to the case. I really wish they would just give it to the Pennsylvania State Police to take it over and do the investigation.
Is that allowed by law to turn it?
Yes, that is allowed by law. Ms. Ryan could just say, we are referring this to Pennsylvania State Police barracks, wherever, Clarion, or wherever, and they could handle the investigation.
Now, supposedly Shapiro has divested himself of the case. It's in the hands of the Chester County DA. But by law, is he forbidden of having any contact with the DA of Chester County, any conferences with her, any discussion about what he thinks the case is about and what the conclusion should be? Is that prohibited, or is that discretionary?
I don't have the answer to that. The person who would know that best is James Schwartzman.
So far, he's not talking to either of them.
Yeah. I think that there are legal ethics, and there are boundaries that ethically speaking they're not supposed to cross, but I don't know if there are ethical boundaries that would keep Mr. Shapiro from speaking to Ms. Ryan. I don't know.
All right. Now, also, this raises another question. It makes me wonder because after he turned it over to Chester County reluctantly, because it says even though it was alleged that there was a conflict of interest, that isn't the case. There was no conflict of interest. And then he was saying that the evidence being alleged as new evidence by Attorney Pedraza and the Greenbergs and Tom Brennan, that evidence, for what it's worth, whether it's legitimate or not, that evidence was never presented to Attorney General Shapiro's office. So therefore, if by any chance, if the DA of Chester County overturns the finding from suicide to homicide, wouldn't this be a way of Shapiro covering himself that it wasn't my fault because this evidence was never presented to us? It was hidden by Attorney Pedraza and the Greenbergs and Tom Brennan.
Yeah, so I mean, yes, what you're saying is correct.
In other words, is he hedging his bets just in case it's overturned, so he has an excuse for saying, well, it was never presented to me. How would I know?
Well, that is the way it appears to me. And I think that the Attorney General's office knows that if there were a fair investigation into the case, that it would turn out differently, right? So if it goes to somebody like Ms. Ryan, who's like, I'm a seeker of the truth, I'm going to get to the bottom of this, I'm going to put resources into this and find that, oh yeah, this is definitely a murder. Yeah, they would be able to say, if only we had that evidence. But here's the thing is that I don't find that argument by the Attorney General's office compelling, because every time that there has been new evidence uncovered by Mr. Pedraza and Ellen's parents, that whole team, Mr. Brennan, they have vetted it, they have worked hard on it, and then they have written a letter to the Attorney General's office. Here is what we have found. Every time they've done that, I can't think of a single thing that I have found within their lawsuit against the city of Philadelphia that the Attorney General's office was not made aware of. I can't imagine what that would be.
So what they're saying is not true, that they were never made aware of it. It was never presented to them. The other side, they're suggesting that the other side was withholding that evidence. So that's from what we could see, that's untrue.
Correct. And there's a letter from an attorney at the Attorney General's office when Mr. Pedraza alerted them to Ms. Emery's statement. He got no response, and I think that actually I'm not sure the timeline of events on this, like the order of events, but the Greenbergs obviously feel like their best course of action is to let the public know what's going on, hoping that the pressure that will be brought to bear by the public will cause politicians to do the right thing. So the letter from the Attorney General's office was kind of written like, hey, thanks for giving us information that's publicly available through the court anyway, and that you leaked to the press anyway. We don't find it compelling, and go pound salt. That's kind of how it's written. Right. And they've got a couple of those letters. The Attorney General's office has been in the loop the whole time, and they've either ignored it or willfully fought against the Greenbergs.
Gavin Fish, thanks very much for being with us this evening, and we'll be talking again with more on the Ellen Greenberg case, which is far from over after the family has been, what they say is denied justice for the past 11 years. It was 11 years ago that she was found dead in her apartment, and to this date, they don't believe that they've received any satisfaction or any real justice for their daughter, Ellen Greenberg. Gavin, thanks for being with us.
Happy to do it. Thanks, Larry.